After resolving the tense standoff with the biker club's president, Jason Statham and Rosie thought their nightmare was finally behind them. But when Tucker and Vince's vendetta escalated into vandalism and threats against neighborhood pets, the peaceful Los Angeles community erupted in fear. Rumors of dangerous bikers targeting local dogs spread like wildfire, putting the Iron Wolves' already fragile reputation on the line. Now Jason finds himself in an unexpected position, defending the very motorcycle club he once distrusted. Before we dive into part 2 of this incredible story, leave a comment where you're watching from, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. The Venice, Los Angeles night settled quietly around Jason Statham and Rosie Alice Huntington Whiteley's bedroom. Their two brown dachshunds, Dolly and Peggy, rested in their own beds within the master bedroom. The digital clock's soft glow read just past 2 a.m., the house wrapped in peaceful silence following the eventful confrontation with the bikers earlier that day. Jason lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, his mind still processing the day's events. The unexpected encounter at the gas station, the tense standoff with Tucker and Vince, and the surprising resolution at the biker clubhouse, it all seemed surreal now in the quiet of the night. Beside him, Rosie slept soundly, her gentle breathing a soothing counterpoint to his racing thoughts. Suddenly, the tranquil atmosphere was shattered as Peggy awoke with a start. Her sudden movement caught Jason's attention, and he watched as she climbed out of her bed, her small body tense and alert. Almost immediately, Dolly followed suit, both dogs now fully awake and unusually agitated. Jason propped himself up on his elbows, watching with growing concern as the dogs began to pace around the room. Their behavior was a stark contrast to their usual nighttime routine of sleeping peacefully until morning. Something was clearly amiss. "What's wrong, girls?" Jason whispered, careful not to wake Rosie. But his soft words did little to calm the dogs. Instead, they became more insistent, climbing onto the main bed and pawing at their sleeping owners with unusual urgency. Rosie stirred, mumbling sleepily, "Jason, what's going on?" "I'm not sure," he replied, sitting up fully now. "The dogs are acting strange. They seem anxious about something." As if to emphasize his point, Dolly let out a small whine, her paws scrabbling at the bedsheets. Peggy, not to be outdone, began to nuzzle insistently at Jason's hand, as if trying to pull him out of bed. "Maybe they need to go out," Rosie suggested, her voice still thick with sleep. Jason shook his head, frowning. "No, this is different. They're not just restless, they seem scared." He swung his legs over the side of the bed, reaching out to scoop up Dolly. "Come on, girl," he murmured. "Let's get you back to your bed." But as soon as he set her down in her plush dog bed, she immediately scrambled back onto the main bed, this time adding urgent barking to her repertoire. Peggy joined in, their combined yapping filling the room with a cacophony of canine distress. Jason and Rosie exchanged worried glances, both now fully awake and alert. "This isn't normal," Rosie said, her voice tinged with concern. "Do you think something's wrong? Maybe they're sick?" Jason shook his head, his instincts telling him this was something else entirely. "No, I don't think so. It's almost like they're trying to warn us about something." As if on cue, both dogs suddenly leapt off the bed and scurried towards the bedroom door, their barking intensifying. They pawed at the door, looking back at Jason and Rosie with what could only be described as desperation in their eyes. Jason stood up, his senses on high alert. "I think they want to show us something," he said, moving towards the door. "I'm going to see what's got them so worked up." Rosie sat up, clearly worried. "Should I come with you?" Jason paused, considering. After a moment, he shook his head. "No, you stay here. Lock the door behind me, just in case. I'll check things out and be right back." Rosie nodded, though her expression betrayed her unease. "Okay, but be careful. And take your phone with you." Jason grabbed his phone from the nightstand and slipped it into the pocket of his pajama pants. He opened the bedroom door and immediately Dolly and Peggy raced out, their nails clicking rapidly on the hardwood floor as they headed for the stairs. "I'll be right back," Jason reassured Rosie. "Try not to worry." As he stepped out of the room, he heard the soft click of the lock behind him. Taking a deep breath, Jason followed the dogs downstairs, his mind racing with possibilities. What could have upset them so much? Was it just a false alarm, or was there a real threat lurking in their home? The house was eerily quiet as Jason descended the stairs, the only sound the soft panting of Dolly and Peggy as they waited for him at the bottom. As he reached the ground floor, the dogs immediately raced towards the main front door, their barking intensifying. Jason was about to call out to them when suddenly the house's security alarm pierced the night air with its sharp warning. The sudden noise made him jump, his heart rate spiking as adrenaline flooded his system. He rushed to the security panel beside the door, his eyes quickly scanning the display. The system indicated a breach at the gate. Someone was trying to get in. Just then, he heard rapid footsteps behind him and turned to see Rosie rushing down the stairs, her face pale with worry. "Jason, what's going on?" she called out, her voice barely audible over the blaring alarm. Jason quickly punched in the code to silence the alarm, plunging the house back into an uneasy quiet. "Someone tried to breach the gate," he explained, his voice tense. "The system caught it." Rosie's eyes widened with fear. "Do you think it's those bikers, Tucker and Vince?" Jason's jaw clenched as he considered the possibility. After the events of the day, it seemed all too likely. "Maybe," he said grimly. "We need to check it out." He moved towards the front door. Rosie closed behind him. Dolly and Peggy were still barking frantically, their small bodies trembling with excitement or fear. It was hard to tell which. As Jason reached for the door handle, he paused, turning to Rosie. "Stay behind me," he instructed, "and be ready to call the police if necessary." Rosie nodded, her phone already in her hand. With a deep breath, Jason opened the door, stepping out into the cool night air, ready to face whatever threat awaited them. The street before them was eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the soft rustling of palm leaves in the gentle breeze. Dolly and Peggy trotted beside them, their earlier frantic barking now reduced to low, anxious whines. Jason's eyes scanned the area, his body tense and ready for action. "Let's check the gate," he whispered to Rosie, who nodded silently, her grip tightening on her phone. As they approached the gate, the sound of running footsteps suddenly broke the silence. Jason's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing as he caught sight of two figures sprinting away in the distance. Even in the dim light, he could make out the distinctive silhouettes of biker vests with the Iron Wolf insignia on their backs. "Rosie," Jason said, his voice low and urgent. "It's them, Tucker and Vince." Rosie gasped, her free hand clutching Jason's arm. "They really came back," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "After everything that happened at the clubhouse." Jason nodded grimly. They must have come for revenge after this evening's incident. He watched as the two figures grew smaller in the distance, disappearing around a corner. "This is bad, Rosie. They truly know where we live now." Rosie's face paled in the moonlight. "And who knows what those men are going to do in the future if we don't do anything about it?" With the immediate threat gone, Jason turned his attention to the gate. As they drew closer, the evidence of the attempted breach became clear. The security system panel had been tampered with, wires exposed where the intruders had tried to disable it. "They knew what they were doing," Jason muttered, examining the damage. This wasn't just a random act of vandalism. But as they stepped back, something else caught their eye. Fresh graffiti marred the surface of the gate, the paint still wet in the night air. Crude images of dachshunds were spray-painted across the metal, accompanied by the threatening word "kill" in large angry letters. Rosie's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and fear. "Oh my God, Jason," she whispered. This is horrible. We have to call the police. This is bad enough." Jason nodded, his jaw set in determination. "You're right, this has gone too far." He pulled out his phone, ready to dial, when suddenly the quiet of the night was broken by the sound of opening doors and curious voices. Their celebrity neighbors, drawn by the earlier security alarm, began to emerge from their houses. Concerned faces peered out from doorways and over fences as people called out, asking if everything was okay. Jason and Rosie exchanged a glance, silently agreeing on how to handle the situation. As their neighbors gathered around, expressions of worry and curiosity on their faces, Jason stepped forward to address them. "Everything's all right now," he began, his voice calm and reassuring. "We had a bit of a situation, but it's under control. We saw two bikers running away just now. They tried to breach our gate and left some unpleasant graffiti." The neighbors' eyes widened as they noticed the crude spray paint on the gate. Murmurs of concern rippled through the small crowd. "Bikers?" one neighbor, a well-known actress, asked nervously. "Are these the same ones from the gas station incident an old lady mentioned earlier?" Jason nodded grimly. "You knew about it?" "We believe so, yes." Another neighbor, a retired film director, spoke up. "This is getting out of hand. First, they're harassing pet owners, and now they're vandalizing our homes? What about families with small children here? It's not safe anymore." The crowd's agitation grew, with people voicing their fears and concerns. Some suggested hiring private security, while others talked about installing more advanced alarm systems. Rosie stepped forward, her voice steady despite her earlier fear. "We understand your concerns," she said, addressing the group. "We're going to involve the police. This needs to stop." As the neighbors continued to discuss the situation, their voices growing more animated, Jason noticed a troubling trend. The conversation was veering towards negative stereotyping of all bikers, with some people making sweeping generalizations about bikers hating animals and causing problems in neighborhoods. Recognizing the danger of letting such misconceptions spread, Jason raised his voice slightly to get everyone's attention. "I know this situation is alarming," he began, his tone measured and calm. "But it's important to remember that these two individuals don't represent all bikers. Many bikers are good people and animal lovers. In fact, earlier today, we met with the leader of their club, who was appalled by their behavior and expelled them immediately." His words seemed to have a calming effect on the crowd. Some neighbors nodded in agreement, while others looked thoughtful. "You're right, Jason," the retired director admitted. "We shouldn't judge an entire group based on the actions of a few bad apples." As the tension began to dissipate, Jason gently encouraged everyone to return to their homes. "It's still the middle of the night," he reminded them. "We'll handle this with the police, and we'll keep you all informed of any developments. We apologize for disturbing your sleep." Slowly the neighbors began to disperse, heading back to their houses. Some lingered to offer words of support or to express their gratitude for Jason's level-headed approach to the situation. As the last of the neighbors disappeared into their homes, Jason turned to Rosie. "Well," he said with a wry smile, "so much for keeping a low profile in the neighborhood." Rosie managed a small laugh, the tension of the night finally starting to ease. "I suppose our quiet life just got a bit more exciting." Jason nodded, his expression turning serious once more. "We need to call the police now, and I should probably give Prez a heads up about what happened. He'll want to know that Tucker and Vince are still causing trouble." As Jason and Rosie re-entered their home, the adrenaline from the night's event still coursing through their veins, they were met with an eerie silence. The house, which had been a sanctuary of peace just hours ago, now felt vulnerable, its security compromised by the brazen actions of Tucker and Vince. Dolly and Peggy, sensing the tension in their owners, whined softly and pressed close to their legs. Jason bent down to scratch behind their ears, offering a reassuring smile. "Good girls," he murmured. "You did well tonight." Rosie locked the door behind them, double-checking the mechanism. "So what's our next move?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid the intruders might still be lurking nearby. Jason's expression hardened with determination. "We need to handle this on two fronts," he said, his tactical mind already formulating a plan. "You call the police and report the incident. I'll contact Prez and let him know what's happened. He needs to be aware that Tucker and Vince are still causing trouble, especially while wearing the club's insignia." Rosie nodded, reaching for her phone. "Okay, I'll make the call from the kitchen. You take the living room." "Sounds good," Jason agreed. As Rosie moved towards the kitchen, he called after her, "And Rosie, be thorough. Make sure they understand the severity of the situation." In the living room, Jason pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Prez's number. Despite the late hour, the call was answered almost immediately. "Jason," Prez's voice came through, sounding alert despite the hour. What's going on? Why are you calling so late? Jason took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts before speaking. Prez, we've had an incident. Tucker and Vince, they tried to break into our house tonight. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. What, are you serious? Dead serious, Jason confirmed. They vandalized our gate, left some threatening graffiti. They were wearing your club's vests, Prez. The Iron Wolf insignia was clearly visible. Prez's voice hardened. I can assure you, Jason, our club did not sanction this. Tucker and Vince are no longer members, as you know. They must be doing this on their own. Jason nodded, even though Prez couldn't see him. I figured as much, but Prez, you need to know, this incident has our neighbors worried. They're scared of bikers now. They think all bikers hate dogs and want to harm them. Some are even fearing for their children's safety. There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. When Prez spoke again, his voice was filled with a mix of anger and determination. I understand, Jason. This is exactly the kind of thing we've been trying to avoid. Tucker and Vince are tarnishing our reputation and endangering our relationship with the community. What are you going to do? Jason asked. I'm going to handle this situation with Tucker and Vince right now, Prez declared. I'm gathering my men as we speak. Jason felt a twinge of concern. Prez, I appreciate that, but please be careful. Whatever you're planning to do, avoid violence. We've informed the police about this incident. We had to. I understand, Prez replied. Don't worry, Jason. We'll handle this our way, but we'll keep it clean. You have my word. As Jason ended the call, he heard Rosie's voice from the kitchen, wrapping up her conversation with the police. He walked over to join her, Dolly and Peggy following close behind. What did they say? He asked as Rosie put down her phone. They're on their way, she replied, her face a mix of relief and lingering worry. They said they'll be here as soon as possible. Jason nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Good. And Prez is aware of the situation now. He's planning to deal with Tucker and Vince himself. Rosie's eyes widened. Is that a good thing? Before Jason could respond, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. He gave Rosie's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Let's deal with the police first. We'll worry about Prez and his methods later. As they moved to the front door to await the arrival of the police, Jason couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The night's events had set in motion a chain of reactions, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Whatever came next, he knew they would face it together, with Dolly and Peggy by their side. The police cruiser pulled up in front of their house, its lights painting the quiet street in alternating flashes of red and blue. As two officers approached their front door, Jason and Rosie exchanged a glance, steeling themselves for what was to come. Good evening, officers, Jason greeted them. Thank you for coming so quickly. The lead officer, a tall man with graying hair, nodded. We understand there's been an incident of vandalism and attempted break-in. Can you walk us through what happened? Jason began explaining the events of the night, his voice steady and clear. Two men, Tucker and Vince, attempted to breach our gate. They vandalized it with threatening graffiti. We saw them running away when we came out to investigate. Rosie chimed in, providing detailed physical descriptions of Tucker and Vince. They were both wearing biker vests with the Iron Wolf insignia, she added. The officers listened attentively, taking notes as Jason and Rosie spoke. The lead officer then asked, Do you have any prior history with these individuals? Jason nodded, his expression grim. We had an encounter with them earlier today at a gas station. Tucker kicked one of our dogs. After that incident, they were expelled from their biker club. As Jason recounted the earlier confrontation and its resolution at the clubhouse, the second officer began a thorough investigation of the property. He carefully documented the vandalism, taking photographs of the graffiti and the damaged security system. Rosie, her voice tinged with worry, added, The neighborhood is aware of these troubling bikers. Many of our neighbors are afraid. The lead officer nodded sympathetically. We understand your concerns. We'll increase patrol presence in the area for the night and the coming days. After collecting all the necessary evidence and statements, the officers prepared to leave. The lead officer turned to Jason and Rosie one last time. We'll file a report and begin our investigation immediately. If you notice anything else suspicious, don't hesitate to call us." As the police cruiser pulled away, its taillights disappearing into the night, Jason turned to Rosie. "Let's get back inside," he said softly, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. Once inside, with the door locked behind them, Jason and Rosie exchanged a meaningful look. The contrast between the formal, documented approach of law enforcement and the informal, community-based intervention of Prez and his club was stark. As they made their way back upstairs, both lost in thought about the parallel tracks now in motion, they couldn't help but wonder how these contrasting methods would ultimately come together to resolve the threat posed by Tucker and Vince. The Venice night had deepened, the silence broken only by the occasional distant bark of a dog or the rustle of palm fronds in the cool breeze. Inside Jason Statham and Rosie Alice Huntington Whiteley's bedroom, the digital clock's soft glow read 3:20 a.m. The couple had finally managed to settle back into bed after the police had left, their minds still racing from the night's events. Jason lay on his back, one arm behind his head, staring at the ceiling. Beside him, Rosie had curled up on her side, her breathing slow and steady, though he knew she wasn't asleep. At the foot of the bed, Dolly and Peggy had finally succumbed to exhaustion, their small bodies rising and falling with each breath. Just as he was about to close his eyes and attempt sleep, the sudden vibration of his phone on the nightstand shattered the quiet. Jason reached for it quickly, not wanting to disturb Rosie or the dogs. His eyebrows rose as he saw the caller ID, Prez. Sitting up slowly, Jason answered the call, keeping his voice low. "Prez, what's going on?" Rosie stirred beside him, her eyes opening at the sound of his voice. She propped herself up on one elbow, listening intently. Prez's voice came through the speaker, urgent and slightly breathless. "Jason, we've found them, Tucker and Vince." Jason's body tensed, fully alert now. "Where?" "At the homeless area near the Venice beach," Prez replied. "Listen, Jason, I know it's late, but I need you to come down here. We're settling this the old way, club tradition. Dog competition at Venice Beach, 4 a.m. Jason's brow furrowed in confusion. "Dog competition? Prez, the police have already been involved. They collected evidence. They're looking for Tucker and Vince." I know, Prez said, his voice tinged with a mix of excitement and urgency. "But this is our way of handling things internally. It's more than just a contest, Jason. It's a chance for honor-based resolution within our community." As Prez continued to explain the significance of the competition, Rosie's eyes widened in disbelief. She shook her head vigorously, mouthing "no" repeatedly. Jason held up a hand, signaling for her to wait. "Prez, I understand this is important to you and the club, but I have to inform the police about Tucker and Vince's whereabouts. There's been a crime involving breach of personal property. There have to be legal consequences." Prez's voice took on a pleading tone. "I get that, Jason, I do, but please do us this one favor. Only inform the police once the competition's done. It won't take long, just one round. Please do this for the sake of our honor. This has been our club tradition for a long time." Jason closed his eyes, weighing the request. After a moment, he spoke. "All right, Prez, I'll come, but keep it short. Where exactly at Venice Beach?" "Just past the waterfront area near Ocean View Park. It'll be quiet there in the early morning." "Thank you, Jason. This means a lot." As Jason ended the call, he turned to face Rosie, bracing himself for her reaction. "Jason, no," Rosie said immediately, her voice a harsh whisper. "You can't seriously be considering this. We have work in the morning. Let them settle it with the police themselves." Jason ran a hand through his hair, his expression torn. "I know it sounds crazy, Rosie, but I feel responsible to see this through. I want to make sure the police don't misunderstand or tie Tucker's and Vince's crime to the whole club." Rosie's eyes flashed with a mix of concern and frustration. "This isn't our responsibility, Jason. It's dangerous and unnecessary." "I understand your concerns," Jason said softly, reaching out to take her hand. "But I gave Prez my word. I'll go, make sure things don't get out of hand, and then we'll inform the police. It won't take long." Rosie was quiet for a moment, her internal struggle visible on her face. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. Fine, but I'm coming with you, and we're bringing Dolly and Peggy. Jason opened his mouth to protest, but Rosie cut him off. No arguments. If you're going, we're all going. I'm not staying here alone after what happened tonight. Recognizing the determination in her voice, Jason nodded. All right, but stay close to me at all times, okay? As they got out of bed and began to dress, the gravity of what they were about to do settled over them. The quiet of the night seemed to press in around them, a stark contrast to the potential chaos that awaited them at Venice Beach. Dolly and Peggy, sensing the activity, had woken up and were watching their owners with curious eyes. As Jason clipped on their leashes, he couldn't help but wonder what role these small, brave dogs would play in the events to come. With a final glance around their bedroom, a space that had felt so safe just hours ago, Jason and Rosie headed downstairs. The night air greeted them as they stepped outside, cool and filled with uncertainty. As they made their way to the car, Dolly and Peggy trotting beside them, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something much bigger than a simple dog competition. The pre-dawn streets of Los Angeles stretched out before Jason and Rosie as they drove towards Venice Beach. The city, usually a bustling metropolis, was eerily quiet at this hour. Streetlights cast pools of amber light on empty sidewalks, and the occasional early-morning worker or late-night reveler provided the only signs of life. Inside the car, the tension was palpable. Jason's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes constantly scanning the road ahead and the rearview mirror, alert for any signs of trouble. Beside him, Rosie sat rigid in her seat, one hand absently stroking Dolly's head as the small dog peered out the window from her lap. In the back seat, Peggy whined softly, picking up on the nervous energy permeating the vehicle. "I still think this is a bad idea," Rosie murmured, breaking the silence that had fallen since they left their house. "We should have just called the police and let them handle it." Jason sighed, his eyes never leaving the road. "I know you're worried, Rosie, but I gave Prez my word, and besides, this might be our best chance to resolve this situation without further escalation." Rosie turned to look at him, her expression a mix of concern and frustration. "But why does it have to be us, Jason? Why do we have to be the ones to resolve it?" "Because we're involved now, whether we like it or not," Jason replied, his voice soft but firm. "Tucker and Vince targeted us specifically. If we don't see this through, who knows what they might do next?" As they drove, the familiar landscape of their neighborhood gave way to the more eclectic sights of Venice Beach. Even in the dim pre-dawn light, the area's unique character was evident. Colorful murals adorned building walls, and the silhouettes of palm trees stood out against the lightening sky. The beach itself came into view, a vast expanse of sand stretching out to meet the dark waters of the Pacific. The usual crowds of sunbathers and surfers were absent at this hour, replaced by an almost otherworldly calm. Jason slowed the car as they approached the area Prez had described. In the distance, they could make out a gathering of motorcycles and figures moving about on the beach. "There they are," Jason said, his voice tense. He pulled the car into a nearby parking spot and turned off the engine. For a moment, they sat in silence, the gravity of the situation settling over them. Rosie reached out and took Jason's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Whatever happens, we're in this together, okay?" Rosie reached out and took Jason's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Whatever happens, we're in this together, okay?" Jason nodded, managing a small smile. "Together," he agreed. They exited the car, Jason taking charge of Peggy's leash while Rosie handled Dolly. As they made their way towards the beach, the sound of waves lapping at the shore provided a soothing backdrop to their tense journey. As they drew closer to the gathering, details began to emerge. An elaborate arrangement of obstacle and agility courses had been set up in the sand, their purpose not immediately clear in the dim light. The distant sounds of dogs and gathered bikers guided them toward the event location. Jason felt Rosie's hand slip into his, her grip tight with nervous energy. Dolly and Peggy trotted beside them, their earlier anxiety seemingly forgotten as they sniffed at the unfamiliar scents of the beach. As they approached the group, Jason could make out Prez's imposing figure standing apart from the others. The club leader's face was etched with concern rather than the readiness Jason had expected. "Prez," Jason called out as they drew near. "We're here. What's going on? Why haven't you started the event?" Prez turned to face them, his expression grim. "Jason, Rosie, I'm glad you made it, but we've got a problem. Tucker and Vince, they're not here." Jason felt his stomach drop. "What do you mean they're not here? I thought you said you found them." Prez ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his voice. "We did, but those cowards, I don't think they're coming." Another club member, who Jason recognized as Nero, spoke up. "We should wait 5 more minutes. Perhaps they're on their way." But Prez shook his head. "Bikers are never late, Nero. You know that. I think they want to escape." The gentle lapping of waves against the shore provided a stark contrast to the tension that hung in the air. Jason, Rosie, and the gathered bikers stood in a tight circle, their faces etched with concern as Prez began to explain the situation to Jason. "You see, we tracked Tucker and Vince to a homeless area through our network of biker connections," Prez said, his voice heavy with regret. "That's how we found them earlier, hiding among the homeless. I told them to settle this matter peacefully, to do it the old way, our club tradition of a dog competition." Jason nodded, encouraging Prez to continue. The club leader's face twisted with a mix of anger and disappointment as he went on. "I offered them a chance at redemption. If their dog won the competition, I'd welcome them back into the club on the condition that they admit their vandalism to the police and face the legal consequences of their actions. If they lost, they'd have to return their biker vests and turn themselves in, or we'd call the police ourselves." Rosie's grip on Jason's hand tightened. "That seems more than fair," she said softly. "Why would they run from that?" Prez shook his head, his expression darkening. "I regret extending that chance of mercy now. I should have just called the police on them right then and there when I found them, or dragged them here myself instead of trusting they would come on their own." As the implications of Prez's words sank in, a sudden cry for help shattered the tense atmosphere. All heads turned towards the boardwalk, where a young man in a uniform was running towards them, his face pale with fear. "Help! Help!" he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "They're taking the dogs and hurting them." The group surged forward to meet the newcomer. As he drew closer, Jason could make out the logo on his apron, Venice Animal Shelter. "What's happening?" Prez demanded, his voice cutting through the confusion. "Who's taking the dogs?" The shelter worker, gasping for breath, pointed back the way he had come. "2 of you!" he panted, his eyes darting between the bikers. "They're wearing the same vest. Your people vandalizing our animal shelter." A collective gasp went up from the group. Jason felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the full implications of what was happening. Prez's face hardened with determination. "Where's your shelter?" he asked, his voice sharp with urgency. The young man pointed towards Santa Monica. "A block from here. There are other staff inside, but they were too scared. They were all told to crouch in the corner with their hands tied by dog leashes. Only I made it out." Without hesitation, Prez turned to his club members. "All right, stop talking. We're moving out now." In a flurry of motion, the bikers raced through the sandy area, some with their Rottweilers in tow. They quickly mounted their bikes, securing their dogs and revving their engines. Jason turned to Rosie, his expression grim. "We need to go too. Those animals need help." Rosie nodded, her earlier reservations forgotten in the face of this new crisis. "Let's go." They rushed back to their car, Dolly and Peggy sensing the urgency and keeping pace. As they pulled out of the parking lot, they could see the bikers already speeding down the street towards the shelter. The drive was tense, the street still largely empty in the early morning light. As they neared the shelter, they could see the bikers' motorcycles parked haphazardly outside a modest building with a sign reading, "Venice Animal Shelter." Jason parked quickly, turning to Rosie before they got out. "Stay in the car with Dolly and Peggy," he instructed. "Lock the doors. I'll go in with Prez and his men." Rosie looked like she wanted to argue, but after a moment she nodded. "Be careful," she said, her voice tight with worry. Jason leaned in, pressing a quick kiss to her cheek before exiting the car. He jogged towards the shelter entrance where Prez and his men were gathering. As they approached the door, They could hear muffled shouts and the frightened whimpers of dogs from inside. Prez turned to the group, his face set with determination. "Remember," he said, his voice low and intense, "our priority is the safety of the staff and the animals. Let's end this quickly and cleanly." With a nod to Jason, Prez pushed open the door and they stepped into the chaos within. The scene that greeted them was one of utter mayhem, and Jason knew that the next few moments would be crucial in resolving this crisis and bringing Tucker and Vince to justice once and for all. The interior of the Venice animal shelter was a scene of chaos and fear. As Jason followed Prez and his men into the building, the full extent of Tucker and Vince's desperate actions became apparent. Staff members were huddled in corners, their hands bound with dog leashes, terror etched on their faces. The air was filled with a cacophony of barking and whimpering from the frightened animals in their cages. In the center of the room stood Tucker and Vince, their faces twisted with a mix of desperation and malice. Each held a shelter dog, Tucker gripping a trembling Frenchie while Vince had a brown spaniel tucked under his arm. The dog's eyes were wide with fear, their small bodies shaking uncontrollably. "Look at these," Tucker sneered, shaking the Frenchie roughly. "They're not even dogs. This Frenchie don't even bark, and this spaniel was too ladylike. They're abominations." Prez's authoritative voice cut through the chaos, his tone sharp and commanding. "Tucker, Vince, this ends now. Let the dogs go and free the staff." Tucker and Vince's heads snapped up, their eyes widening as they took in the sight of Prez, Jason, and the other club members filling the shelter's entrance. "Well, well," Vince sneered, tightening his grip on the spaniel. "Look who decided to show up. The big bad Prez and his celebrity lapdog." Prez took a step forward, his eyes blazing with anger. "Your actions right now are abominations. I shouldn't have offered you the chance to return to our club and just called the police on you back then." Jason stood beside Prez, his body tense and ready for action. He scanned the room, assessing the situation and looking for any opportunity to help the trapped staff and animals. "Let the dogs go," Prez demanded again. "Return the puppies to their rooms and unbind the staff. This is your last chance to do the right thing." Tucker laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Do the right thing? That's rich coming from you, Prez. You expelled us from the group and now we'll let everyone know how much this club sucks. Thanks for the vest, by the way." Prez's jaw clenched, his patience clearly wearing thin. "You two are not worthy of that vest, and right now you're just adding more charges to yourselves. I can't save you now." As Prez dialed the police, some of the club members began carefully moving towards the bound shelter workers. With quick, efficient movements, they started freeing the staff, helping them to their feet and guiding them towards the exit. Seeing their hostages being freed and the police is informed, panic flashed across Tucker and Vince's faces. They exchanged a quick glance, seeming to come to a silent agreement. "This isn't over," Vince snarled. In a sudden burst of movement, they let go of the dogs, almost throwing them in their haste. Prez lunged forward, managing to catch both puppies before they hit the ground. He quickly handed them off to a nearby staff member, his eyes never leaving Tucker and Vince. Taking advantage of the momentary distraction, Tucker and Vince made a desperate dash for the side door, still wearing their biker vests. "Nero!" Prez shouted, his voice ringing with authority. "Release the dogs!" In response to Prez's command, Nero whistled sharply. 3 large Rottweilers, Diesel, Raven, and Grim, sprang into action, racing after the fleeing men with practiced precision. As Tucker and Vince burst out of the side door into the early morning light, Jason and the others followed close behind. The chase was on, and the next few moments would determine whether justice would finally be served for all the chaos and fear Tucker and Vince had caused. The cool morning air hit Jason's face as he raced out of the shelter, hot on the heels of Prez and his men. Ahead, Tucker and Vince were sprinting down the street, their biker vests flapping behind them as they ran. The sound of pounding paws on pavement filled the air as the 3 Rottweilers, Diesel, Raven, and Grim, gave chase, their powerful bodies a blur of motion. Jason's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline surging through his veins. He could see his parked car just ahead, Rosie's worried face visible through the window. Dolly and Peggy were peering out too, their small faces pressed against the glass. The Rottweilers, trained for this very purpose, quickly closed the gap between themselves and the fleeing men. With precision that spoke of countless hours of training, they targeted Tucker and Vince's boots, aiming to bring them down without causing serious injury. Suddenly Tucker stumbled, his foot caught by Diesel's powerful jaws. He went down hard, rolling across the pavement with a cry of pain and surprise. Vince, hearing his partner's fall, glanced back, a mistake that cost him dearly. In that split second of distraction, Raven and Grim pounced, bringing him down just a few feet from Jason's car. As Tucker and Vince lay sprawled on the ground, the Rottweilers stood over them, growling softly, but making no move to attack further. Their job was done. They had successfully apprehended their targets. Prez and his men quickly caught up, surrounding the fallen pair. Jason joined them, his breath coming in short gasps as he tried to catch his breath. "It's over," Prez declared, his voice firm and final. "You've got nowhere left to run." Tucker and Vince, realizing the futility of their situation, ceased their struggles. As they lay there, defeated, their eyes fell on Jason's car. Seeing Rosie and the two Dachshunds watching from inside, their faces twisted with anger and frustration. "You!" Tucker spat, glaring at Jason. "This is all your fault." Before Jason could respond, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. The police, likely alerted by concerned neighbors who had witnessed the chase, were on their way. Prez acted quickly. With a gesture to his men, he approached Tucker and Vince. In a symbolic move that carried great weight within the biker community, Prez reached down and stripped the Iron Wolf vests from both men. "You don't deserve to wear these," he said, his voice low and filled with disappointment. "You've betrayed everything our club stands for." As Prez stepped back, the Rottweilers, their duty done, returned obediently to their masters. Nero bent down, praising each dog with gentle pats and quiet words of commendation. The police cars pulled up just as Prez finished securing Tucker and Vince. Officers poured out, quickly taking in the scene before them. "What's going on here?" the lead officer demanded, his hand resting cautiously on his holstered weapon. Jason stepped forward, ready to explain the situation, but before he could speak, one of the officers conducting a search of Tucker and Vince called out. "Sir, you're going to want to see this," the officer said, holding up several small bags of what appeared to be illegal substances. The lead officer's eyebrows shot up. Well, he muttered. "Looks like we've got more than just vandalism and attempted break-in to deal with here." As the police began the process of arresting Tucker and Vince, reading them their rights and securing them in the patrol cars, Jason felt a wave of relief wash over him. The nightmare that had begun with a simple trip to the gas station was finally coming to an end. Rosie emerged from the car, Dolly and Peggy in her arms, and joined Jason. "Is it over?" she asked softly, leaning into his side. Jason nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I think so," he replied. "At least this part of it is." A detective approached the couple, notepad in hand. "Mr. Statham, Mrs. Huntington Whiteley, I'm Detective Sarah Martinez. I'd like to get your statements about the events of last night and this morning, if you don't mind." Jason nodded, shifting Peggy in his arms. "Of course, Detective. Where would you like us to start?" "Let's begin with the incident at your home," Detective Martinez suggested. "I understand there was an attempted break-in and vandalism." Over the next hour, Jason and Rosie provided a detailed account of the night's events. They described the initial disturbance at their home, the threatening graffiti, and the subsequent chain of events that led them to the animal shelter. Jason was careful to explain the role of Prez and the biker club, emphasizing their assistance in apprehending Tucker and Vince. "And you say this all started with an encounter at a gas station yesterday?" Detective Martinez asked, her pen moving swiftly across her notepad. Rosie nodded, gently stroking Dolly's head as she spoke. "Yes, that's right. Tucker kicked our dog, Peggy, and things escalated from there." As they continued their account, other officers approached, gathering around to listen. The story of celebrity dog owners, rogue bikers, and a midnight animal shelter rescue was clearly not an everyday occurrence, even in Los Angeles. Prez, who had been giving his own statement nearby, joined them as Jason described the club's involvement. "I want to make it clear," Prez interjected, "that Tucker and Vince's actions do not represent our club or its values. We came here to stop them and protect the animals." Detective Martinez nodded, making a note. "We appreciate your cooperation, sir. It certainly seems that your club's intervention was crucial in resolving this situation peacefully." As the statements were concluded, Jason couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in the officer's demeanor. The initial suspicion towards the bikers had given way to a grudging respect, a recognition that appearances could be deceiving. "Well," Detective Martinez said, closing her notepad, "we have more than enough to press charges against Tucker and Vince: attempted breaking and entering, vandalism, animal cruelty, possession of illegal substances. They're looking at some serious time." Jason and Rosie exchanged relieved glances. The nightmare that had begun with a simple trip to the gas station was finally coming to a close. As the police began to wrap up their investigation, preparing to leave the scene, Jason noticed a small group of reporters gathering at the edge of the police cordon. News of the incident had clearly spread, and the presence of a celebrity couple had drawn media attention. Rosie noticed them too, her body tensing slightly. "Jason," she said quietly, "I think it's time for us to go. We've done what we needed to do here." Jason nodded in agreement. They had given their statements, ensured the safety of the shelter animals, and seen Tucker and Vince brought to justice. There was no need to turn this into a media circus. As they prepared to leave, Prez approached them one last time. "Thank you," he said earnestly, "for trusting us, for being here. You didn't have to be, but you were. You gave us a chance to make this right." Jason shook Prez's hand firmly. "Thank you for stepping up when it mattered. You've shown us that there's a lot more to your club than meets the eye." A mutual understanding passed between them, an acknowledgement of the unexpected alliance that had formed in the face of adversity. With final nods of farewell to the officers and shelter staff, Jason and Rosie made their way back to their car. As they walked, Jason could hear Prez's voice behind them, addressing the gathered reporters. This was Prez's moment, his opportunity to set the record straight about his club and the biker community. "This is not what our club or any other biker club stands for," Prez's voice carried on the morning air. "We're part of this community, and we stand against those who would harm animals or threaten our neighbors." As they reached their car, Jason helped Rosie settle Dolly and Peggy in the back seat. Before getting in himself, he took one last look at the scene behind them. Police cars, animal shelter vans, and a group of leather-clad bikers standing shoulder to shoulder with law enforcement. It was an image that defied easy categorization. With a small smile, Jason slid into the driver's seat. As they pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the chaos of the night and the bustle of the morning, he couldn't help but feel that they had been part of something important, something that might just change perceptions and bring their community closer together. As they drove home, the events of the past 24 hours slowly receding in their rearview mirror, Jason and Rosie exchanged a look of shared understanding. Their simple life might have been disrupted, but they had emerged stronger, with a newfound appreciation for the unexpected allies they had found in their community. As Jason and Rosie pulled into their driveway, the familiar sight of their home brought a wave of relief washing over them. The events of the past day and night felt almost surreal in the bright morning light. Dolly and Peggy, sensing they were home, perked up in the back seat, their tails wagging with anticipation. Just as Jason turned off the engine, he noticed movement from the house next door. Their neighbor, Tom, a retired film director, who had been particularly vocal about his concerns the night before, was making his way over to them. "Here we go," Jason muttered under his breath, preparing himself for another round of worried questions. But as Tom approached, his face bore an expression not of fear or concern, but of sheepish embarrassment. "Jason, Rosie," he called out as they exited the car, I owe you an apology." Surprised by this unexpected opening, Jason and Rosie exchanged a quick glance before turning their attention to their neighbor. Tom continued, his voice tinged with regret. "I've been following the events on the live news coverage just now. I I think I may have been hasty in my judgment about those bikers. About all bikers, really. Jason nodded, encouraging Tom to go on. I saw how that club leader, Prez, was it? I saw how he and his group helped apprehend those troublemakers, and then I heard him speaking to the reporters about their community involvement, their love for animals. Tom shook his head, a rueful smile on his face. I guess I let my prejudices get the better of me. I'm sorry for that. Rosie stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Tom's arm. We understand, Tom. It's been a stressful time for all of us. What matters is that you're willing to reconsider your views. Jason nodded in agreement. That's right. And you know, this whole experience has been eye-opening for us too. We've learned that there's often more to people than meets the eye. You should have made it into the news, big man, but I didn't see you there. Tom winked and walked back to his house next door. Jason and Rosie finally made their way inside their house. Dolly and Peggy trotted ahead, eager to return to the comfort of their familiar surroundings. Once inside, Jason and Rosie collapsed onto their couch, the exhaustion of the past 24 hours finally catching up with them. Dolly and Peggy hopped up to join them, curling up contentedly in their laps. Well, Jason said, breaking the comfortable silence, I think it's safe to say this wasn't quite the quiet life in Los Angeles we had in mind when we moved here. Rosie laughed, the sound bright and relieved. No, definitely not, but you know what? I wouldn't change it. Look at what we've accomplished, the connections we've made. Jason nodded, his hand absently stroking Peggy's fur. You're right. We've helped bridge a gap in our community. And who knows, maybe this is just the beginning. As they sat there, surrounded by the warmth of their home and the love of their furry companions, Jason and Rosie knew that while their life might not be as quiet as they had once envisioned, it was rich with meaning and unexpected adventures. The sunlight streamed through the windows, bathing the room in a soft golden glow. Outside, they could hear the sounds of their neighborhood coming to life, children laughing, dogs barking, and the distant rumble of motorcycles that no longer carried a hint of threat. In that moment, as Dolly and Peggy dozed in their laps and the Statham Huntington Whiteley household found a moment of peace, Jason and Rosie exchanged a look of deep understanding. They had faced a challenge together and come out stronger for it, and while they knew that life would undoubtedly bring more surprises their way, they were ready to face them, together, with their loyal dachshunds by their side, and with a community that was now more united than ever before.